back to the show, PJ. Last time you spoke to us on the dangers of porn. Today you're going to be talking to us about romance versus red flags in relationships. What are the characteristics of an unhealthy relationship?
Wow, that's a biggie. There are loads, as you can imagine. Some of the more commonly known behaviours that would be considered abusive are things like obviously violence, so physical violence, but there's also a lot that can be non-physical. So it could be forms of manipulation, power imbalance, could be belittling, so using words as weapons. It could be control, that could be physical, economical, emotional, psychological, reproductive. So lots of different things, and they're very subtle. Some of them I'll talk a bit more later, I think, about the gaslighting stuff, but there's a lot that can happen very gradually, so it's very difficult to actually identify it, especially when you're in it yourself.
So we know it's important to talk to young people about relationships, but how do we kind of integrate those specific topics, which we would see as being quite serious, into an age-appropriate way?
I find entering that space with them and letting them know you're on their side. So ultimately, you are there. It's about safeguarding. So it's about making sure that they are happy and safe in their experiences of sex and relationships. And as human beings, we absolutely crave relationship. Whatever that looks like, it'll be different for all of us, but it's often really hard to discern that difference. So it's about helping them understand what's healthy, unhealthy, and even abusive, because relationships don't start out as abusive. They're often really intense, really exciting. And so you get really carried away and caught up in it. So it's just breaking those down. And when they know you're on their side, I find they're really open, because ultimately they want the good stuff. They want to have great relationships, don't they? They want to feel that, that excitement and pleasure and happiness and safety at the end of the day.
When looking at a young person's relationship, there are obviously going to be differences in how they would approach it and what things they can do, and the kind of the freedom that they have. How best would you describe a young person's healthy relationship, and what things that they should be looking for?
So we are all going to experience different sorts of relationships, regardless of gender, sexuality, and age. But there is always going to be an element of key aspects that will mean it's healthy. So we're talking about things like good communication, friendship, trust, honesty, healthy boundaries, mutual consent, mutual respect, forgiveness, compromise, honesty, vulnerability, and faithfulness. So all these things, think of them like building bricks, and that's going to be that foundation. So whatever the relationship looks like here, within that you need to have those great qualities, because otherwise it's very unlikely you'll have a sustainable healthy relationship in the future. And I find with young people, without effective relationships and sex education, teens are much more readily they're going to adopt sexual scripts from sexual scenes in porn or films. They're going to be thinking actually that's the norm, so their expectations shift a bit. So it's really about breaking down the taboos and the distortion of it all, and looking at those skills and tools that they need to actually build and maintain healthy relationships. And again, I talk about sexual health in that sense that it's another way of keeping us safe. So just like mental health, we've got dental health, physical health, sexual health. It's nothing to be ashamed about. It is about how you are going to keep yourself physically and emotionally safe when you, or if you decide to have a sexual relationship of some kind.
So, how do you know if you're in a toxic relationship?
It's a really good question. There's a really fine line between when a relationship moves from being healthy to unhealthy and even abusive. Now, there are lots of physical forms of abuse that people are quite familiar with, but I often cover the more subtle ones. I call them the hidden abuse, because often it's really difficult to actually identify when you might be in that kind of relationship, you're not really knowing. So some examples of really subtle forms of abuse, something called negging. Have you heard of negging before?
Never heard of that.
So negging it's kind of, there's a fine line between flirting and hurting. So negging can sound a bit like this. I love that dress. It would look amazing on a size 6. Or it might sound like this. Nice haircut. Makes your nose look so much smaller. So
Blimey.
basically, somebody's coming along, they're giving you a compliment, they're flattering you because they've identified you, and then they come in and they just say something to knock your self confidence a little bit. So you're then left feeling like you almost need to justify yourself, and already you've started that relationship on a sort of power imbalance. So there's something else called love bombing, which is all about really intense text messages or gifts or expensive dates. And it's basically somebody trying to keep another person. And it comes from a place of insecurity, but it's that kind of desperation to try and keep them in that relationship.
Mm.
Then you've got things like isolation, which is really easily missed because when you're at the beginning of a relationship, the chemicals are intense. It's like a cocktail, and you just want to be with that person. The difference is in a healthy relationship, two worlds join together. Actually, if you've got one that's leaving things behind, so it might be someone stopped seeing their friends as much, or maybe doesn't see their family as much, or gives up the hobbies they once had, that's a form of isolation that can be a bit of a red flag warning. Then there's volatility. So we see this in the movies. We have the humongous arguments and the amazing makeup sex. So in relationships, in life, none of us are perfect. So we're going to have little bumps along the way, and that's normal and that's okay. But when you have volatility, so you've got the real highs and the real lows, and then the highs and the lows, that is a bit of a kind of bust up makeup cycle. And again, a bit of a red flag warning. And then we've got extreme jealousy. So, jealousy is a natural emotion, and we will all feel that at times. However, when jealousy moves into the realm of possessiveness, then that is a warning sign. And I'm sure we all know the series Friends. So, Ross is a great example of that kind of extreme jealousy and possessiveness. I was in a workshop with year 10 students, and some feedback came back about gaslighting. We've been talking about these kind of hidden forms of abuse. And this 14-year-old wrote, I won't let him treat me in an unhealthy way anymore. And I just got goosebumps in that moment because I realized not only had they identified what was going on, they could name it now and they were going to call it out, which means potentially I'm not going to see them in a domestic abuse survivors group in 10 years' time because at age 14, they've already discovered what's going on and that it's not okay. So there's lots there. It's very, very subtle. But I mean, I don't know if you've seen the film, the series Sex Education on Netflix.
Yeah, love it.
Yeah, so there's a great scene in that when Viv realizes that she is in an emotionally coercive relationship, and her friend Amy comes up with these really wise words, and she says this: "Love should make you feel safe. It should make you feel braver because you can totally be yourself around that person. It shouldn't be confusing and it shouldn't be scary." And I just think that sums it up brilliantly. It's one of those kind of recognizing that the abuse cycle is about charm, harm, but it goes back to the charm and it's this kind of vicious circle. So it's really important to help young people recognize it, even in other people's relationships, not just for themselves. It may be that they see a friend going through something and actually think, do you know what, that's not okay. And it may be the first time someone says to them, do you realize? And it kind of opens up the doors.
I find it fascinating that so many young people are actually a lot more switched on than probably I was back when I was their age. Uh, I think a lot of it they've learned from online. I think that, yes, okay, we've spoken before how there's so much negativity online and it's not all great education, but there are some really good things that actually maybe are catching their eye and really switching their attention to the right places. But it does show, though, there is an absolute necessity for the education that you're providing to schools, and the fact that you're an independent as well really does help because they're able to kind of. I think they're able to kind of recognise the approach you're bringing rather than just one of their teachers doing it. I
Mm.
think that's really beneficial.
It's just about helping them kind of think that if something doesn't feel right, trust your gut instinct.
Mm.
And, if your physical, mental, or emotional health is at risk, love yourself enough to walk away. It's about giving them that permission almost to go, this is not all right. And I'm allowed to walk away. I'm allowed to say no. I was looking at some stats from the World Health Organization, and they said 1 in 4 15 to 19-year-olds have experienced intimate partner abuse. And those three common forms of teen abuse are controlling behavior, threatening behavior, and sexual coercion. So it's big, it's real, and 25% of our teenagers that we may know have already experienced this stuff. So it's really important to talk about it.
Do young people ever talk about regrets when it comes to their relationships?
Yes, and I talk to all sorts of ages as well. So it's really difficult. I mean, sadly, it is a reality for many people, specifically when they're referring to their first encounters. And there have been lots of different reasons, but sometimes it's been things like peer pressure, seeking affirmation in the wrong place. It might be because they were drunk or high at the time, might be about not having sex with the right person, just doing it to fit in because they're struggling with self esteem. It could be a lack of love, or it could be a sort of guilt and shame thing. So I really try and work on the whole self-esteem element and self-worth, because self-esteem impacts decision making when it comes to sex and relationships. And it's about helping people realize that actually they deserve and they have the right to experience healthy relationships that are consensual and safe. I remember doing workshops in one particular school, and year 10 sent me some anonymous feedback. And somebody wrote, "I won't let them use me for sex anymore." And so they had a realization that actually they were in this kind of pattern, and they recognized that wasn't really what they wanted, and that they didn't have to do that to be accepted or to feel good about themselves. So it's also about saying actually delaying sex is a perfectly valid choice too. We talk about intimacy and trust, and actually, if you have those things and all the qualities we mentioned a few minutes ago, you're going to have a much better experience, whether that's a relationship that's platonic or romantic or a sexual relationship.
Gosh, that's quite some feedback to get, isn't it? That
Mm,
must have been quite hard hitting for you.
yeah.
That seems to be one of the biggest issues with young people, is that they feel that they have to rush into having a sexual relationship, and there's a lot of peer pressure with that. How would you advise someone to navigate away from that if they're feeling like they're really under pressure to kind of like have sex with someone, and they feel it's because their friends expect it of them? How would you encourage them or provide them with the tools to kind of avoid that situation?
Yeah, it's really difficult, and there is so much pressure. They're growing up in a sexualized society, so it is everywhere. Whether that's in songs, whether it's films, whether it's pornography, whether it's peer pressure. But I think what I tend to do is take them right back to themselves and talk about that gut instinct and talk about their self-worth, self-esteem, and get them to do. I've got activities which help them consider what they really value, because how often do we stop and think what's actually important to me? Often we snowball into situations. So there's opportunities where they can actually look at various qualities within a relationship, and they create their ideal relationship. And for them, it's often the first time they've realized that they value. It might be family. It could be that they get on, my partner, my ideal partner will get on well with my family. Or it might be trust is a really big thing. So when they've created this kind of structure, they can then identify. So if they're beginning to get to know someone and this kind of relationships there, maybe there is that peer pressure coming in. Actually, if they value a certain quality that isn't being shown, they're much more likely to have the confidence to go, actually, do you know what? No, thanks. Because they know what they're looking for. So sex is another one. I throw that sex card in. They've created this ideal, kind of character for their partner, give them the sex card, and I say, right, if that applies, or if it will apply, where does that fit? What do you think about sex? Do you value sex? Is it a transactional thing? Is it something you want to really protect? And so they begin again to think about where sex fits in with them and their future selves. And again, by doing that, it gives them that kind of confidence in themselves, going, actually, I know what I want. So actually, then they're in a better, stronger position to say no.
A lot of our opinions and the way we think and the way we act can sometimes come from the way that we're brought up. Do you think that that has quite a part to play into who a young person chooses as being a partner?
I think it does. Yeah. I mean, there's often you grow up knowing what you know because of what you see. So, I've worked with students and young adults and domestic abuse survivors, and the narratives around they've said to me things like, I just didn't know, we didn't know this stuff. So they didn't know the red flags. They experienced stuff which they thought was normal because that was their familiar setup. And if something feels familiar, then it feels safe. So you kind of stick with it. So you can see why those kind of repetitive toxic relationships can carry on into your adult life, because you really don't know any different. So that's why working with young people, being proactive and preventative, is really key to helping them be informed enough to be critical thinkers, make informed decisions, and develop healthy relationship behaviours.
Because there's a number of people out there that do kick up a bit of a fuss about young people at school being taught this form of education. They're like, oh, they should be able to learn it from home. But then you are within that echo chamber of
Yeah.
what could potentially be a very kind of abusive or damaging education they're providing, and some of it subconsciously. But other parents I've found in the past, sometimes it's because actually from their experiences they don't want that to be discussed or opened up about within the school context, and they're worried that actually this education might create a space for a child to talk about their experiences. Is that what you found?
Yeah, and I find, if there are concerns and I chat to them and I explain is safeguarding. That it literally is safeguarding. This is the bottom line. And I think when you discuss it in that sense, they really understand it, because ultimately, generally speaking, a parent and a carer are not going to want their young person to come into harm. So if we are saying, actually, by educating them these life skills and these tools and recognizing what is healthy, helping them understand and think about what they really value and want, they're in a much stronger position to actually face things as and when things arise as they grow up. So, it's like we wouldn't expect a child to sit a maths exam, GCSE, without teaching them the curriculum. So why are we expecting children to grow up and know how to have healthy conflict, how to argue effectively, and to know what is right and what is wrong in terms of what's safe? So we do need to have these conversations. And when you bring it back to safeguarding, generally speaking, people are really open to that because they get it.
So how can a parent, carer, or anyone who works with children, how can they identify harmful sexual behaviours?
Oh, it's a biggie, isn't it? So there's curiosity about bodies and sex is absolutely normal. It's a part of development. And sexual behaviours can be age and stage appropriate, but they can also be a sign of child sexual exploitation or child sexual abuse, which can be harmful to themselves or others. So it's difficult to identify, but I would recommend people check out the traffic light tool from Brooke. And this is a way it breaks down what's green, amber, and red. And it will be things like categorizing sexual behavior for different age groups, whether it's typical behavior, whether it's a cause for concern, whether it actually indicates harm. So that is really useful as a starting point to begin to understand those differences.
That's really fascinating. And can you remind us of that name again?
Yeah, Brooke. So if you just search for Brooke, it'll come up, and within their website, they've got the traffic light tool.
That's all brilliant.
Great for educators, great for parents, just as that kind of starting point.
We'll make sure that we put that on the socials as well to help out. Do you have any top tips then for parents, carers, educators when it comes to keeping young people safe? And that could be through conversations, that could be through activities. What can you provide as guidance on that?
Oh, I've got lots. I've got so much. I will try and contain myself. So, first of all, recognize it's okay to feel uncomfortable about talking about sex. You do not need to be a sexpert, and you are definitely not alone if it feels uncomfortable. Second thing I say to parents and carers generally is practice saying certain words. Okay, so write a list of everything to do with sex, everything to do with body parts, and then say them out loud. And when you notice, if you do it in the mirror, when you notice your face grimacing or cringing or flinching, they're the words you need to practice. And the whole point is you need to be able to have conversations, develop an amazing poker face. So when your young person talks to you about this stuff, you won't react in a way that says to them, this isn't okay to talk about. The whole point is to create a safe space so that they can come to you with the little things, because then they'll come to you with the big things. And so you just need to be approachable, even if inside you are cringing and thinking this is horrendous. So definitely do that. And I heard this amazing story, parent in a playground and primary school, waiting at the end of the day, full of parents waiting for their child, and their daughter runs out, falls over. And the mum says, "Oh, darling, are you okay?" And she says, "Yes, I just hurt my vulva." And the mum just stopped. And she thought, I kind of feel immensely proud that she knows the correct terminology, but I'm also really mortified and embarrassed. So it really is, again, it's body parts. This is an arm, this is a nose, it's a penis, it's a vulva. Just say it as it is, because they just then grow up knowing the names of those body parts. And pet names are fine, but it's really important they do know the correct terminology as well. I'd say look for opportunities to use that correct terminology. So again, this helps shut down misinformation from anything online they might see or from friends. Talking about body parts in a really relaxed way is helpful. When it comes to the safeguarding side of it, I'd say it's really important to talk to them about the difference between a surprise and a secret, because surprises are going to be fun. Everyone finds out about them eventually. Whereas a secret is this not to tell someone, I've told you this, but you're not allowed to tell someone. So it's about teaching young people that actually it's okay to say no to adults sometimes. They shouldn't be passive. And that's about empowering them to be safe. In terms of the questions you might get, I'd say every question deserves a response, but not every response necessarily has to be an answer. So it's more harmful to ignore your child's questions about sex than it is to answer them. But you might want to say, that's a really great question. I'll get back to you, and make sure you do, because otherwise you're saying to them, again, this isn't something we talk about. But you'll gauge it, you'll know them, you'll know what they can retain. Some children, they'll only process what they can, but you just don't want to give them too much, so they then miss the key points of your conversation. Another tip is about being busy. So doing an activity, whether it's talking to each other whilst you're driving, because then there's no eye contact, because you really don't want to have this going on, talking about sex. So talking, whilst you're driving, going for a dog walk or just a walk, and it's just, or doing an activity where your hands are busy, because both parent, carer and child generally much more relaxed when that's going on. So that's other tips. I think the biggest thing is about changing the thinking that lots of adults have about the talk. So it's about saying, think of it as a slow cooker approach. Okay, so it's not about microwave cooking. It's not instant and it's not quick. This is a gradual process of having just another conversation. And it's like a scaffolding approach where you're just building and building to their knowledge bank. So I'd say it's better to have 100 1-minute conversations than having one 100-minute conversation. And through all that, just be positive. So fear tactics don't usually work. I'd say reinforce that positive, safe, healthy behaviours. Talk about what healthy relationships look like, how to be an upstander, key aspects of consent. So think of fries. I always talk about consent of fries: freely given, reversible, informed, enthusiastic, and specific. Great mnemonic just to help children understand those key elements. But it's really about focusing on those positive rather than negative. So your child is able to feel a kind of a positive outlook rather than that fear and growing up thinking the worst, because ultimately this is about safeguarding. And I think one of the greatest gifts you can give a child is a safe space to learn about important life skills. It's their human right to have this information. They need to be empowered and enabled to be smart when it comes to RSE. And ultimately you're preparing your child for the big world of sexuality. So education is about being protective, proactive, preventative, so they can grow up being happy, healthy and safe.
So many helpful tips there. Thank you so much. We'll make sure we put out some little small clips so that people can keep up with them on our YouTube page. But that brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us again, PJ. It's always interesting to chat with you.
Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the follow button so you don't miss another episode of Safeguarding Redefined.